Hi everyone, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. So the case that we are covering today has been on my radar for the longest time. And today's case mostly takes place on a remote farm in New Hampshire, USA, where there lived a woman named Sheila LaBarre, who decided that it was her divine mission from God to rid the world of pedophiles. But the problem with that is that Sheila started to believe that every single man that she came across was either a pedophile or a sexual predator. So Sheila started to lure vulnerable and younger men to this remote farm. She would entice them with sex. She would go all dominatrix on them. She was even given the nickname Sheila the Peeler because she liked to peel her clothes off of herself at any given opportunity, and she just liked to be naked. But Sheila would take over the lives of these men that she lured to the farm. She would control them, abuse them, even torture them until it all ended in the most devastating consequences. So that is what we are covering today, Sheila LaBarre. So let's jump in. And I just want to give a huge thank you to today's sponsor, and that is Audible. And if you weren't already aware, Audible is one of the best places to go for some extra true crime content that I know you've all been craving. They have so many true crime audiobooks, and I highly recommend If You Tell by Greg Olson, which is about the case of Shelley Notek. I have talked about that audiobook so many times now, but if you haven't listened to it, you need to. But not just that, Audible is home to loads of gripping, original, long-form true crime podcasts. They have an amazing series on Jonestown, the Ashley Madison hack, Ghislaine Maxwell, all of which I recommend. And one extra original podcast that I have been binging lately is called Cursed. And you all need to go and listen to this podcast right now. The case that this series dives into is absolutely crazy. Do you remember the case that I covered, Cat Torres? Well, the case in this podcast gives strong Cat Torres vibes because it covers the story of a British NHS nurse who was at the center of a highly organized trafficking ring where she would lure victims from Nigeria into Europe, control them using West African rituals before trafficking them into sex work. It is absolutely insane. You cannot make this stuff up. And it is perfectly narrated by a British Nigerian journalist who dives deep into this case. It has also been produced by the production company behind the Tinder Swindler docuseries, so you know it's going to be good. And Audible is the best place to go to fulfill your true crime needs. And there is so much more to imagine when you listen. And you can listen to the Cursed series exclusively on Audible by going to the link in my description box. And using that link really does help out this channel because it lets Audible know that you came from this video. So thank you again to Audible for sponsoring today's video, but thank you to every single one of you guys watching right now, because truly without all of you guys I wouldn't get opportunities like this. And now let's jump into today's case. Sheila LaBarre was born on the 4th of July 1958, making her a Cancer, and she grew up in Fort Payne, Alabama, where she lived with her mom and dad and her 5 siblings. Now her mom, Ruby, absolutely adored Sheila, doted on her. Sheila was like the apple of her eye. However, the same cannot be said for Sheila's dad, Manuel. He was an absolute monster. He was a violent alcoholic. He would lash out at his wife all of the time, and he would also lash out at the children. There was an incident when Sheila was just 6 years old and her dad had come home from drinking and he was drunk and he completely destroyed the kitchen. He tipped over the oven. He pushed over the fridge. He was literally breaking things left, right, and center. He threw a metal can at Sheila's face and it left her with a big scar on her face that she still has to this very day. There was another time where he chased all of the children out of the house, chased them into a car, and then he started punching the windows in on the car. There was another time where the dad chased the whole family around the house. Sheila remembers fleeing into a nearby cornfield and her dad literally chased her through this field with an axe. Yep, an axe. And he was threatening to kill the whole family. It sounds like a horror movie. Like, how has this actually happened to somebody in real life? But if you think all of that is bad, it only gets worse. Because Manuel, he really was an evil monster because he also sexually abused his 2 young daughters. And this included Sheila. The abuse started from a very young age, and of course it had a huge effect on Sheila. She was traumatized traumatized by the abuse, trauma that stayed with her whole life. She became incredibly paranoid about her personal safety and about just doors and windows being locked at all times. But it wasn't just Sheila's dad that sexually abused Sheila, because this monster also invited over his friends to also sexually abuse his daughter. So to say that Sheila had it tough growing up would definitely be an understatement. And growing up, in order for Sheila to cope with living in that house, Sheila threw herself into a little fantasy world. She really would live in her head. She was always daydreaming. And I can understand, she was trying to escape the nightmare that was her reality. She would always fantasize about becoming either a model or an actress or a singer, somebody that lived a glamorous lifestyle. And by the time she reached the age of 18 and she'd finished school and she was entering into the adult world, Sheila had a goal for her life. And her one big goal in life was to find herself a husband that was preferably rich, so he could take care of her like her dad couldn't. So Sheila decided that the best place to possibly find a rich husband was beauty pageants. So this is what she did. She entered a load of beauty pageants and contests and all stuff like that because she thought that that was the best hunting ground for a rich husband. It is also said that she became incredibly confident in her own sexuality. It is said that she dressed provocatively. She dressed in a way that would attract men. She had a very fiery personality. She was very bold. She was very confident. It is said that she used her looks to try and manipulate men and bend them to her will, which is definitely a common theme in today's case. And she was also given a nickname as the Woman in Red. And did she wear a lot of red? I don't know. But she was also given another nickname, and that was Crazy Sheila, because she was just known to be extremely erratic. People commented on her laugh, saying that it was like a cackle, like an actual cackle, like a witch or something, and that her behaviour was just always a bit strange, a bit weird. And then finally, in December of 1981, Sheila is currently 23 years old. And this is when she met a man called John Baxter. And this is when Sheila entered her first of many marriages. Now, John, he was an electrician and he had a very flashy sports car. He was also only 19 years old, and I assume he had a decent amount of money because that is what Sheila was looking for. And because he is only 19, he is so young. Sheila saw him as easier to control and manipulate. And Sheila definitely likes younger men. She definitely targets them on purpose. She definitely looks for men that are more vulnerable. Now, John did have a daughter called Wendy from a previous marriage, and Sheila absolutely despised Wendy, the daughter. Now, the reason why she despised Wendy was because Sheila wanted all of John's attention. She was essentially jealous of the daughter, and she became a stepmom from hell. Truly. She hated that Wendy took up any of John's love and affection and attention, and she treated her stepdaughter Wendy appallingly. Because when John was at work, Sheila was left to look after Wendy, and she would lock that little girl in a bedroom all day. She wouldn't let her out. She wouldn't give her any food. She had no access to a bathroom. She actually gave her a pot in the room to use as a toilet. And if Wendy ever complained, Sheila would break her toys and beat her up. She beat her into submission. And she also told Wendy that if she ever told her dad that she was abusing her, Sheila would kill her. So this went on for a little while. Wendy was living in fear from her stepmom from hell, not saying a single thing to her dad, John. However, one day Wendy did say something to her birth mom, Nancy, who is obviously John's ex. So then the mom, Nancy, told John. John immediately rushed home from work and found Wendy locked in a cupboard. So John immediately got Wendy out of that situation. He told Sheila that their marriage was over. And I just want to point out that they had only been married for 6 weeks at this point. So this is an incredibly short marriage. But thank God John believed his daughter and got her out of that situation straight away, because you hear it so many times in these cases where the parents don't stick up for their own children. So thank God John actually acted like a parent. But did Sheila take this kindly? No. She was angry, and angry is an understatement, because she blamed Nancy for all of this. She didn't blame herself, the abuser, no, she blamed Nancy. So the first thing she did was stormed around the house, destroying everything. This is John's house, by the way. Sheila moved in with him. So she's destroying all of the things around John's home. She then steals his flashy sports car, which, let's be realistic, that is the only reason she's even with him. And then she heads straight to Nancy, the birth mom's home, and she tries to attack Nancy with a hammer. This attack came completely out of nowhere. However, Nancy, she pulls out a machete to defend herself. Again, I'm like, this sounds like a horror movie. I have no idea where this machete comes from, but go Nancy for defending herself against crazy Sheila. So Sheila fled the scene because this is clearly not what she was expecting. But Sheila was not about to let this drop. No. She had it out for Nancy, because 2 days later, she actually followed Nancy to a restaurant, followed Nancy inside, and Nancy was sat at a table. She was actually eating her food, and Sheila knocked the food out of her hand and began to choke her in a restaurant with people around. But again, Nancy was not about to take this lying down. It turns out that Nancy was actually stronger than Sheila, so she was able to fight her off. And again, I'm like, go Nancy. Nancy threw Sheila to the ground, dragged her along the ground by her hair before smashing Sheila's head into a metal bumper of a car, completely knocking Sheila out. And if that is not karma, I don't know what is. But Nancy called the police, obviously, and thankfully Sheila dropped her little crusade against Nancy and finally left her alone. But that was husband number 1, and it only gets worse from here on out, because now we need to meet husband number 2. And this was a man called Ronnie Jennings, and he worked as a chef, and Sheila met him only a few months after her divorce was finalized from John. And Sheila, she did her usual thing, very manipulative, very charming. She flirted, and she soon won over the love and affection of Ronnie, and they eloped and got married. And just like the first marriage, it was chaotic from day one. The couple were constantly arguing, always fighting physically with one another. Both parties, Sheila and Ronnie, have both accused each other of physical abuse. I mean, we obviously know that Sheila is very capable of physical abuse, so I 100% believe that it's coming from Sheila, but who knows about Ronnie? But Ronnie would accuse Sheila all the time of attacking him, and Sheila would also constantly threaten to attack Ronnie with a pair of scissors. And Ronnie just lived in constant fear every single time that he went to sleep that Sheila was going to kill him in his sleep with a pair of scissors. And this was just what was going on in this marriage. It was just constant fights, arguing, and possibly abuse from both parties. And this marriage, it lasted for approximately a year, but after a year, Sheila decided that she was bored, and she starts up an affair with an older rich man, who was also married, by the way. Yes, both married. Eventually, Ronnie did find out, and he wanted out of the relationship. He wanted a divorce. But again, Sheila didn't take this very kindly at all. She stormed into the restaurant that he worked at and caused a big scene in front of everyone. She actually pulled out a big bottle of tablets and told Ronnie that if he didn't do what she wanted, she was going to take every single tablet and kill herself. But Ron was used to Sheila's antics, and he was like, no, I'm sorry, this is over. I'm not about to be blackmailed. And he truly did not think that Sheila would follow through on her threat and take all of the tablets and try and take her own life. However, Sheila did, because Sheila, she poured all of those tablets into her mouth and she swallowed every single one. And Ronnie, he instantly went into a panic because he had no idea what the tablets even were. It even went through his mind of, are they even real? Like, are they some sort of like fake tablet or whatever? Because I truly would not put it past Sheila. So Sheila then storms out of the restaurant. She steals Ronnie's car, which again, she likes to steal cars. So she steals Ronnie's car and she starts to drive off. However, the tablets that she had taken, I still don't know what they are, but they were real tablets of some sort. She started to suffer the side effects of taking so many tablets, and she was incredibly drowsy, and obviously she's driving, and she was driving at high speed, endangering every other person's life on the road and pedestrians. And she lost control of the car and she crashed the car into a ditch, thankfully not harming anybody else. But she was rushed to hospital, her stomach was pumped. Doctors at the time didn't think that she was going to make it. She was placed in ICU and she was in a coma for the next 8 days. And after the 8 days, she woke up, she survived. And when Sheila woke up, she was really hoping that her husband Ronnie would be there at her side, that he would see the light and they would still be together. And that just shows you that she really did try to take her own life to keep Ronnie around. But Ronnie still did not want to be in a relationship with her. He still wanted a divorce. And Sheila was actually committed to a psychiatric ward where she would spend the next 30 days receiving treatment. And Sheila absolutely hated these 30 days. She did everything that she possibly could to get out of it. She started to come up with lies saying that the staff at the hospital were raping her, which was obviously not true. She was just trying to do everything in her power to get out of the psychiatric ward, but nothing worked and Sheila was released after the 30 days. So after this near-death experience, Sheila apparently had an epiphany. She had a whole new perspective on life because out of the blue, she started to think that she had a divine mission from God. And what was this mission? Well, after the car crash, Sheila started telling absolutely everybody that when she went into the coma for 8 days, she had actually died and gone to heaven where she spoke to God. And God told Sheila that she had a very important mission and he was sending her back to earth because her mission was to rid the world of pedophiles. That was apparently Sheila's divine mission from God. Rid the world of pedophiles and every single sex predator there are. But Sheila would eventually take this apparent divine mission too far and it would end in devastating consequences. But before Sheila would carry out her divine mission, something else very significant happens. Because it is now 1987. Sheila is currently 29 years old and freshly divorced. And she was on the hunt to find a new boyfriend that she could take advantage of. So one day Sheila was just going through a newspaper looking at the local ads and she came across a personal ad from Dr. Wilfred LaBarre. And Wilfred LaBarre, he goes by Bill. He was 60 years old and a very wealthy chiropractor who owned a large farm. He had been married twice previously. His first wife, who he had children with, they divorced. And then his second wife tragically passed away from cancer just a few years prior to this personal ad. So Bill, now a widow, he was incredibly lonely and he wanted to find a partner. So he posted an ad in a newspaper that said, quote, Doctor, widower, 60 years old, looking for someone not too tall. Those were his requirements. Just somebody, anybody, just not too tall. And this ad jumped out at Sheila. And do you want to know why it jumped out at Sheila? Because number one, it said doctor. Doctors earn quite a lot of money. It also said widower and 60 years old. That makes him more vulnerable. So Sheila replied to the ad and said that she was, quote, 28, 5'5", I have a great sense of humor and I judge a person from the mind and heart. And I'm like, really, Sheila? No, you judge a person by the size of their wallet. Sheila also included a photograph of herself naked. Yeah, it was just Sheila. She was standing in front of a mirror and she was completely naked. She was probably hoping that that would catch Bill's eye. And it did. It definitely made a first impression because Bill immediately wanted to start to get to know Sheila a little bit more. So they started chatting on the phone quite a lot. And after only 2 days of talking on the phone, Bill invites Sheila to come and stay with him on his farm. And this farm, it was a massive 115-acre property. It was incredibly peaceful, it was remote. And it is said that Sheila spent her first few days at the farm running through the fields of tall grass naked. Yeah, she's running through the fields naked. Again, I'm like, what movie is this? Do people actually do that? I don't know, like, what? You will find out that Sheila likes to strip down completely naked at every single given opportunity, and they are not appropriate opportunities. No. So Sheila and Bill, they quickly entered into a sexual relationship, and Sheila was having sex with Bill a lot. And as soon as Sheila got to the farm, she did decide right there and then that she never wanted to leave again, that this was the lifestyle that she was destined to lead. So Sheila made the move from Alabama all the way to New Hampshire, which is where this farm is, and that is where the rest of today's case takes place. And once Sheila is on this farm with Bill, she does not waste any time. She soon reveals what her true intentions are with Bill, which was to take everything from him. She started barging her way into every aspect of Bill's life, completely taking over. It is reported that she would strut around the local town in very revealing type clothing, and she would let every single person know that Bill was hers. She was basically laying down her territory. She also took Bill's surname, LaBarre, even though they weren't married, but she would go around and tell everybody that she was his common law wife. She also took over Bill's chiropractor business, and she was running the show. She was firing people left, right, and center. She was even a nightmare to the patients. But then, just to top it all off, Sheila convinced Bill to change his will. And currently in his will, all of his assets, the farm, everything was going to be divided equally between the children. Well, Sheila managed to convince Bill to leave everything to her. So this relationship goes on for a while. It is incredibly controlling, possibly abusive. We don't have any reports that it was abusive, but given Sheila and what we know, I can guarantee you it was abusive. And this relationship really took its toll on Bill's health. He was suffering with extreme fatigue, stress, depression. He developed hypertension, and 8 years go by, which is just crazy. That Sheila stays in this relationship for 8 years. This is her longest relationship so far, but we all know why she stays, and that is the money. But after the 8 years, Sheila was bored. She was fed up with playing housewife to Bill, and she wanted a new boyfriend. So Sheila went off into the local town and just started flirting with every single man that she came across to try and find a new boyfriend. And she started bringing men home to have sex with them under Bill's nose. And you have to remember that she's bringing them home, but that's Bill's home that she's bringing them home to. And they're still together. She's just decided that she's going to basically openly cheat on Bill in front of him. But in 1995, this is when 37-year-old Sheila decides to settle down with now a new long-term boyfriend called Wayne, as well as still seeing and being in a relationship with Bill. It's very, very complicated. And Wayne was currently 29 years old, so he is 10 years Sheila's junior. She definitely has a thing for targeting younger men because she does think that they will be easier to manipulate. And Wayne had recently emigrated from Jamaica to the US to find work. And again, this made him more vulnerable, and Sheila took advantage of it. Sheila actually decided to marry Wayne pretty much instantly and move Wayne onto Bill's farm. So now all three of them are living together in this very weird relationship dynamic. So now Sheila hires her husband Wayne to be a handyman and to carry out maintenance on the farm. And for the first few weeks, things were okay, as good as they can be in a relationship with Sheila. But obviously, as you can all imagine, it didn't take long for Sheila to show her true colours and become abusive towards Wayne. She forced him into doing all sorts of maintenance work all over the farm, and she would beat him if he didn't do the job well enough. She would also pull out a gun on him, threatened to shoot him, and told him that she was going to, quote, send him back to Jamaica in a box. She would also throw him out of the house constantly and force him to sleep outside in the cold winter. There were times when he had to sleep on the floor and he didn't have many clothes on and his bare skin was touching the icy ground, and he did nearly freeze to death multiple times. But Sheila just got a sick thrill out of this. But if you think that was bad enough, wait till you hear what happens next. Because Sheila tells Wayne that she has a new job for him. And what was this job? Well, Sheila wanted Wayne to kill Bill. I know, what the actual hell? She wants to hire Wayne as a hitman to kill Bill, and they all live in Bill's house, don't forget that. Sheila was fed up with waiting for Bill to pass away, because obviously when he passes away in his will, Sheila gets everything. Well, she was fed up of waiting. She wanted to speed up the process. Now, Wayne was absolutely horrified by this, and he said absolutely not, because Wayne liked Bill. Bill was kind to Wayne. Bill had opened up his home to him. So because he said no to Sheila, Sheila was furious with Wayne and started beating up Wayne. She set all of his belongings on fire, and she said that if Wayne didn't do this, she threatened to get him deported back to Jamaica. But then the next thing that Sheila does makes me so angry, because Sheila starts punching herself in the face over and over again. She started digging her nails into her skin, making scratch marks. She was scratching herself so hard, she was drawing blood. She started to tear at all of the clothes that she was wearing. She gave herself a black eye and a split lip. And Wayne was thinking, what is going on? He truly thought that Sheila had lost the plot. But this is when Sheila dialed 911 to report her husband Wayne physically abusing her. And I'm like, oh. And this makes me so angry. She is trying to frame this whole thing to make it look like Wayne is physically abusing her, when it's actually the other way round. She wanted to try and get her husband arrested, but thankfully the police saw through this and they never arrested Wayne. But thankfully this was the final straw for Wayne, and he filed for divorce. And thankfully he never saw Sheila ever again. So that was husband number 3. Technically, husband/relationship number 4 if we're still counting Bill, because she obviously never got married to Bill. And obviously Bill is still alive. The assassination attempt did not work. And Sheila and Bill are still in a relationship with one another, which I just think is absolutely crazy. And even though we don't know the details about Sheila and Bill, like when it comes to like the physical abuse, I just feel like Sheila must have been abusing Bill in some kind of way to keep him trapped like this. So over the months after Wayne left, Sheila again starts bringing a load of men back to the farm for sex constantly. It was a revolving door. And again, this is all in front of Bill, until one day she settles down with a man called James Becket, who was in his early 20s. So he is 20 years younger than Sheila, her perfect victim. And James has been described as someone that is just incredibly sweet, kind, caring, somebody that wouldn't even harm a fly. And Sheila took advantage of his nature and controlled him, manipulated him. And just like her previous relationships, she started to physically abuse James. She would beat him with her fists, with household objects. She was also making up a load of lies about James just as an excuse to beat him up even more. She accused him of cheating on her, harming her pet rabbits, destroying her property, all of which was lies. She would even pull a gun out on James and threaten to shoot him. On occasions, she actually would shoot past his head, which would have been incredibly scary and intimidating. There was also a time where she chased him with an axe, just like her father. She chased him into a camper van that was on the grounds of the farm. James got into the camper van, locked it, but Sheila got the axe and started smashing through the metal door, splitting it in half. And again, I'm like, what horror film is this? She has definitely learned from her father. There was another time where she chased James with a knife. There was another time she chased him with garden shears. There was even a time where they were taking a bath together and she grabbed a metal grill brush and struck James across the face with it, knocking out his 2 front teeth. I'm speechless. I really, really am. And then things came to a brutal climax with one particularly bad assault, because Sheila picked up a pair of scissors and stabbed James in the head. I just really have no words. The police were called out to this, and Sheila tried to use the excuse of self-defense. Again, she accuses James of being abusive, of attacking her. Sheila even told the police officer that James had injured her vagina, and she said to a male police officer if he wanted to look at it. And the male officer said no, he will get a female police officer to help her out. And as soon as the male police officer said no, Sheila changed her mind. She was like, oh yeah, no, my vagina's fine. She literally just wanted an excuse to get naked in front of the male police officer. In the end, Sheila actually did end up in court for these apparent domestic abuse charges. And during the hearing, Sheila actually burst into tears and shouted out, "I'm bleeding from my vagina. I need help." She ran from the courtroom, making this huge scene. The judge didn't have a clue what was going on. I don't think anyone had a clue what was going on. And in the end, Sheila returned to the courtroom and she said, "Oh, my mistake. I was just on my period." I have no words for this woman. And the judge was bewildered. He was fed up with all of this nonsense and he actually committed Sheila to a mental health facility for 3 days. James agreed to drop the charges and no legal action was taken. And unbelievably, from this point forward, things in the relationship calmed down and James and Sheila stay together for the next 5 years, which I am like, what? Why is James staying in this relationship? She has just stabbed him in the side of the head with scissors. But in those 5 years, something very significant would happen because Bill, Sheila's non-husband, does pass away. This happened in December 2000. Bill was around 73 years old and apparently he just one day collapsed on the floor and died of a heart attack. And I say apparently because at the time his death was ruled as by natural causes. No evidence was found to suggest any kind of foul play or even point in the direction of Sheila. But Bill's family were incredibly suspicious. Number one, they did not trust Sheila at all and they knew that something was going on. Because in the months leading up to Bill's apparent natural death, he was becoming incredibly sick. And not in a natural way. His skin was turning green. He just didn't seem like himself and there was apparently nothing wrong with him, but there quite clearly was. And Bill's family suspect that Sheila could have possibly been poisoning him or just something like that. And then after Bill's death, this was when the children learned for the first time that Sheila was going to get all of the assets, that they had been completely written out of the will, which is more evidence to suggest that Sheila is behind this death in some kind of way. And that must have been incredibly painful for Bill's children to lose their dad anyway, but then to find out that Sheila, the woman that he's been living with, has possibly murdered him, but now she also is taking everything from him, and she was just laughing at them. But then in the months that followed Bill's death, Sheila actually did fall into a deep depression. It turns out that Sheila actually missed Bill because she had been living with Bill for the last 15 years, which is crazy to think about. She now felt incredibly lonely on this big farm without Bill. So who knows? Did she murder him? Did she not? Did he actually die of a heart attack? We just do not know. I think it could be possible either way. Let's just put it that way. So at this point, Sheila has no job. She felt like she had no purpose. I'm pretty sure her boyfriend James is still living with her at this point, the one that she stabbed in the head. But Sheila wanted nothing to do with him. They barely even spoke, so I don't even know why James is still living there. So Sheila turned to drugs. She was smoking a lot of marijuana and she turned to tranquilizers. Another form of escape that Sheila used was she turned to sex chat lines. She would spend hours every single day talking anonymously to men about all of her fantasies and fetishes, and she would really push the boundaries of what she was talking about. And Sheila over time developed a massive obsession with sex. I mean, I feel like she kind of already was obsessed with sex, but now it just goes into overdrive because she's bringing men back to the farm constantly now. And her thing was she wanted to be a dominatrix. She wanted to control men, which is not really a shocker, is it, considering how she does treat her men? But obviously, she doesn't want to do it in a consensual way or anything like that. She wants to control men. And another thing that she really wants to do is humiliate men. That is what she gets off on. So Sheila dived into this world of non-stop sex. And this is when her behavior starts to get even more bizarre. Her mood was incredibly erratic. She was getting into arguments with people constantly. She was also telling people these really crazy stories that there was ghosts living on the farm that would physically and sexually abuse her. And I know we've spoken about this already. We know that Sheila likes to get naked at every single opportunity, but now it really does go into overdrive. And it is sexual harassment at this point. It truly is. For example, whenever delivery people would drop off post or packages, whatever, at the farm, she would answer the door naked. Yeah, completely naked. She just opened the door. Like I said, sexual harassment. And she would do this repeatedly to the point where delivery drivers, they refused to go to that house because she would try to lure them in. She would try to lure these delivery men into her home so she could have sex with them. This is when she developed the nickname Sheila the Peeler because she would peel off her clothes in public. On top of this, Sheila had also become a landlord after inheriting some of Bill's properties, and she became a landlord from hell to the point where she was endangering lives. There was one time where she broke into a tenant's home and turned on all of the gas burners on the kitchen hob and then left the oven door open and nearly started a fire. On another occasion, she spray painted on a tenant's wall, quote, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." In another example, she broke into a tenant's home, turned on all of the lights, shattered a window, and then poured bleach into an aquarium, killing all of the tenant's fish. I have no words. I truly have no words. She is becoming so unhinged, and I can't believe that she's just going around doing all of this, and she seems to be getting away with it. But there is one thing that is really important right now, and that is her divine mission from God. Oh yes, Sheila has not forgotten about her mission from God to rid the world of pedophiles and sexual predators, because that now comes back even stronger. She started to believe that she had special powers that allowed her to judge and enact punishments at will, including executions. She believed that she had an instant radar that allowed her to just look at a man and know if he was a pedophile or a sex predator instantly. And this included every man that she brought back to the farm to have sex with. Now, Sheila, she resisted the urge to kill them at first. And it just doesn't make sense. It's like, why are you bringing men back to your farm to have sex with them if you genuinely believe that they are pedophiles or sexual predators? It just does not make sense, any of this. Truly, this case gives me a headache. But according to Sheila, the urge to rid the world of pedophiles, it became too strong. She could not ignore the urge anymore to kill them. And this is the part of the case now where Sheila's deluded beliefs now turn into a deadly reality. Because it is now late 2003. At this point, she has kicked James off the farm. She doesn't want to live with him anymore, doesn't want to be in a relationship with him. And this is when Sheila sets her sights on her first victim, a man called Michael Deloge. And Michael had had a pretty tough life so far. He grew up in Connecticut with his parents, loved music, would go to open mic nights in New York City. He got married and had a child. However, things went downhill for Michael. He became a heavy drinker and a drug user. His life fell apart. He became unemployed. His wife left him, and he didn't see his child again, and he soon ended up homeless. And in 2003, he relocated to New Hampshire to be closer to his mom, and he found accommodation in a homeless shelter. He worked on becoming sober. He was working so hard to turn his life around, and this is unfortunately when he met Sheila LaBarre. And Michael caught Sheila's eye straight away because he's vulnerable. He was over 10 years younger than Sheila. He was currently in a homeless shelter trying to find a more permanent place to live, and he was the perfect victim for Sheila. And Sheila swooped in and told Michael that she could help him and help turn his life around, that she would save him. So she invited Michael to come and live with her on her farm. And they soon entered into a romantic relationship, and as with all of Sheila's relationships, it turned abusive. The first thing that Sheila did was she wanted to distance Michael from his mom. She no longer allowed Michael to see his mom, who he was incredibly close to. The abuse became physical. Sheila would beat Michael with an iron rod until he bled. And Michael, he never fought back. He never even tried to defend himself in any kind of way. He would just shield his body and get as small as possible, and he would just shudder in fear. Sheila would also keep Michael locked up in a bedroom for hours. She would only ever go into that room when she wanted sex, and the sex was always violent. Sheila always played the role of the dominatrix, and the sex was not consensual, so she was raping Michael. And like I've already said, Sheila really got off on humiliating men. That was her biggest sexual desire. So she would beat Michael senseless for her own sexual gratification. She would also sometimes drop Michael off in the middle of nowhere, like in the middle of a field, like truly in the middle of nowhere, in the freezing cold, sometimes in the middle of the night. and she would force him to find his way home. But Michael always returned. He was completely trapped in that relationship. Sheila had completely worn him down, and this relationship lasted for years. This abuse and manipulation went on for a very long time, and Michael just didn't know how to get out. But then on top of all of this, Sheila also subjected Michael to long interrogation sessions. And why was Sheila interrogating Michael? Well, she believed that he was a paedophile. She set Michael up in a room, she got a tape recorder, she started to beat him, probably with an iron rod, and she just started asking him question after question, and the questions were like, have you ever harmed an animal? Have you ever harmed a child? Have you ever abused another person?
This is an interview with Michael Todd Deloge, who makes his living off women, off innocent, kind-hearted people. Really want to be responsible for the death of a loved one. Turn your back on Michael Deloge before it's too late. He's a very dangerous person, a passive-aggressive, cool killer. Most pedophiles, before they kill, begin doing the same things that Michael Deloge has done.
And if Sheila didn't get the answer that she wanted, she would just beat Michael until he gave her the answer that she wanted. So eventually, Michael started confessing to things that he hadn't done. And he was only doing this to stop the beating. So Sheila would say, have you ever abused a child? And Michael ended up saying yes. Michael ended up confessing to a load of different things. He ended up confessing to sexually assaulting Sheila's pet rabbits. He confessed to touching the private parts of children. She also made him confess to getting erections when he used to babysit young children when he was a teenager. She also made him confess to, quote, fondling the vagina of his mother. And that was all that Sheila needed to hear. This interrogation was brutal and violent, and as soon as Sheila got these false confessions, this was now her excuse and her justification to abuse Michael even more, beat him even more, and it would soon eventually lead to worse than that. And the abuse over time, it just got worse, and Michael actually did try to escape multiple times. He was actually spotted by a neighbour lying in a pool of blood in the snow, and I can't even imagine being a neighbour finding someone literally lying in a pool of blood. The whole ground, the snow, everything was just completely red with his blood. His face was all cut up. A chunk of his ear was missing. He was struggling to breathe. Those are serious injuries, and we don't know the details on how he got those injuries, but I don't think it takes a genius to figure out what she's doing to him. She is beating him black and blue, using weapons possibly to cause someone to lose a chunk of their ear. And when the neighbor asked Michael what happened, like how did he get into this situation, Michael was able to say one word. He managed to choke out the word Sheila. However, for one reason or another, we don't know, but Michael ended up back on the farm. He went back to Sheila. Sheila then started making a load of very suspicious entries into her journal. She started to brainstorm different ways on how to kill a man. She wrote about burning a body, hiring a boat, dumping the body parts in the sea. She also forced Michael to write letters to his parents. And in one of the letters, Michael wrote to his mom that she had raped him multiple times as a child and that he couldn't forgive her for what she has done, which obviously Michael's mom never did that, but Michael has been manipulated into accusing his mom of that. It is just so messed up. He also wrote a letter to his dad confessing to sexually abusing his little sister, confessing that he was a paedophile, which again wasn't true. Sheila is just doing everything to cut Michael off from his family so they wouldn't come looking for him. And then after this is when Sheila finally decided to take action for something that she had been preparing for a very long time. And we actually don't know the details on how this happened. We don't know how she got away with it. All we know is that Michael disappeared off the face of the earth. This is when she took Michael's life. And it's just so heartbreaking what poor Michael went through for so long. No one came looking for him, and no one even suspected Sheila of this murder until many years later. And now that Sheila has gotten away with her first murder, what does she do? She goes out looking for more victims, of course. More and more men just kept coming to the farm. Most of them were vulnerable, they were homeless, possibly runaways, men that people wouldn't notice if they disappeared. Sheila was also accused of stalking her neighbor. She followed him into the woods and threatened him with a rifle after he refused to have sex with her. Also around this time, more men just disappeared, like dropped off the face of the earth that were associated with Sheila. There was an Irishman that Sheila was spotted with in town. We don't know his name. And he was pleading with people that Sheila was abusing him and that he needed help. And then he just disappeared and no one saw him again. Now, there's no evidence technically that Sheila murdered anybody in this time. However, there are a lot of suspicions because during this time, no one actually knows exactly what Sheila was up to. A lot of men that were associated with her just went missing, and it's just too weird of a coincidence for me. But now we get to 2006. Sheila is now 48 years old and she finds another victim, and this victim, we do know their identity. This victim was a man called Kenneth Countie, who goes by Kenny, and he was only 24 years old. So literally half of Sheila's age. And growing up, Kenny was just described as an amazing kid. He loved sports. He always had the biggest smile on his face. He had dreams of joining the army. However, he also struggled with learning difficulties. It's said that his mental capacity was that of a 12-year-old, even though he was 24. And sadly, he was ridiculed and teased about this, especially about his speech. And when he left school, he actually did join the army. He started to undergo the basic training. But it is said that Kenny couldn't even do a sit-up, and he was soon discharged, and he was told that he just didn't have what it took to be in the army. And because this was like his dream, he was devastated. And this is when Kenny moved into a assisted living facility where he saw his mom all of the time, and Kenny's mom was his best friend. And in 2006, when Kenny had turned 24, he became incredibly lonely, and he turned to sex chat lines for company. And who did he start talking to on these chat lines? Well, of course, it was Sheila LaBarre. And now things start to move incredibly quickly because from the moment Sheila spoke to Kenny, she knew that he was the perfect victim for her. So they go on their first date on Valentine's Day in 2006. And Sheila invites Kenny to come and live with her on her farm. And Kenny accepts. It really was that quickly. Then over the next week, Kenny stops answering phone calls from his mom, which is not normal because that's his mom, but also his best friend. They spoke on the phone every single day without fail. So Kenny's mom tracked him down to the farm and learned that he had started living with this random woman called Sheila, and Kenny's mom was like, what the hell? But on top of that, Sheila wouldn't let Kenny's mom anywhere near the farm to see her son. So naturally, she was concerned and she phoned the police. So the police show up, Sheila answers the door, and the police ask to see Kenny. And Sheila is like, oh, sorry, he's in the bath. Like, he can't come to the door right now, but he's fine. Like, you don't need to worry. You just need to go away. And the police were like, we're not having that. We need to see Kenny now. So Kenny eventually comes to the door, and he's only half dressed. He only has on a pair of jeans, and he already looks a lot skinnier than just a week ago because he's only known Sheila or known her in person for a week. He's only been living at this farm for a week, and he has already lost a dramatic amount of weight. So when Kenny comes to the door, Sheila turns to Kenny and says, tell the police that you're okay. Tell the police that you are here on your own free will. So this is what Kenny does. And because Kenny is an adult, because he doesn't look in distress or anything like that, I mean, the police don't know that he's skinnier. The police don't see that there's anything wrong with this. And because he's an adult, he can make his own decisions. So the police technically can't do anything at this moment. So they leave, and they leave Kenny there. But ultimately, this would end in tragic circumstances because after the officers leave, this is when Sheila steps up the abuse. And this is when she carries out pretty much the same routine with Kenny as she did with Michael. She locks Kenny in a room for hours on end. She withholds food. She basically tortures him. She also demanded sex from Kenny at any time of day, whenever she wanted. And again, she humiliated Kenny. The sex was always violent, non-consensual. And Kenny also had to undergo the interrogation sessions. But this time they were worse. And you can actually hear part of the recordings of these interrogation sessions online. And in the recordings, you can hear Kenny's voice in the background, and he sounds so distressed.
This recording is being made in my living room in Epping, New Hampshire. Present with me is Kenneth Countie.
I know, you're right.
And you can just hear Sheila asking him question after question, trying to get a false confession out of him. Sheila starts coming out with all of this BS. She says that she was, quote, the justice of peace in New Hampshire and that she is on a mission from God. She also says that all pedophiles should be shot on sight.
Has Karen Lodge ever sexually molested you as a child? Yes. Go into your memory and give me the approximate age that you can first recall the sexual molestation by your mother, Carolyn Lodge, being performed on you.
4 years old.
Could it also be possibly younger than that?
Yes.
And you can hear Sheila trying to get all of these confessions out of Kenny. She is going on, trying to get him to confess to abusing children, to sexually abusing children. And if he didn't give the answer that Sheila wanted, she would beat the answer out of him until she got the answer that she wanted.
He is right beside me on the bed, bleeding from a self-inflicted wound. He has scalded himself. He'll blame me for his injuries, but he in fact is to blame.
And just for doing that, just for doing that, I will be there in a minute. You better hope I don't see you.
And you can hear Kenny vomiting in the background. He fainted at one point, and he is incredibly vulnerable. You have to remember that he has the mental capacity of a 12-year-old. And then by the end of the recording, Kenny does confess. He says that he has abused young children, that he sexually assaulted step-siblings and his nieces and just other young relatives.
Kenneth Countie, age 24, has told me that he himself is turned on by this 6-year-old boy.
And that is what Sheila wanted. That was her justification for treating him the way she is. So now she beats and abuses Kenny even more because now he's confessed to being a paedophile. And this went on for weeks. He would go into these interrogation sessions. He would falsely confess to things that he has never done. And Kenny's mom did not stop trying to get her son back. She contacted the police over and over again, asking them to perform welfare checks to check on her son. But the police over and over again just kept saying that there was nothing that they could do. Kenny was an adult. And then on the 17th of March, which is just over a month since Sheila and Kenny first met, something very significant happened. Because Sheila took Kenny on a trip to Walmart. And there are actually photos of this online, and they are so distressing because of Kenny and the condition that he is in. Kenny is being pushed around in a wheelchair because he can't even walk. And his face, oh my God, it is unrecognizable. It is black and blue. His face is so swollen. His clothes also look way too big for him. He has lost even more weight. And the purpose for this shopping trip was so Sheila could purchase 2 large yellow fuel containers. And this is very significant. And it's also so sick that she took Kenny on this trip to buy these containers, given what she plans on doing with them. But when Sheila approaches checkout, she starts acting incredibly shifty. She actually got her camera out and started taking photos of store security. She was also talking to Kenny in a horrible tone, and staff were just a bit concerned about what was going on, so they called the police. Now, this is a very small town, so the 2 officers that went out to Walmart were the same 2 officers that did the original welfare check to check on Kenny. So now these 2 officers are seeing Kenny for a second time, and it is visibly obvious that Kenny is not okay. You can see that he has been abused, and these officers were worried. They asked Kenny to stand up because he's in a wheelchair, but Sheila told him not to. Sheila told Kenny that he didn't have to do what officers told him to, and he should keep his mouth shut. And Kenny did just that. He didn't get up from the wheelchair and he didn't say a single word. And the officers decided that there was nothing that they could do. So they let Sheila and Kenny leave. They actually watched Sheila as she wheeled Kenny out. She lifted him out of the wheelchair because Kenny literally cannot stand up. and then she drove off. And I really am baffled because I understand that Kenny is an adult, but it's so clear that he is being controlled, manipulated, abused. And very sadly, this is the last time anyone would see Kenny alive. Because on the way home, Sheila stops at a gas station and she fills up the 2 yellow fuel containers that she's just purchased. And then once she returns home, the abuse of Kenny continues. It only actually gets worse. But now it would end in absolute tragedy. Because around 6 days after the whole Walmart incident, Kenny's mom again was incredibly concerned. She's been concerned this whole time. And she phones the police again. And I feel so sorry for Kenny's mom. I really do, because she really has tried everything. She went to the farm herself. She has been phoning the police non-stop. She really has been so active in trying to get her son back. And this time the police agreed again to go to Sheila's home to check on Kenny. So it is now the 23rd of March. Police turn up. They ask to see Kenny, and Sheila tells police that Kenny is no longer around. And this is when Sheila turns on the waterworks and breaks down and says that she has no idea where Kenny has gone, but also Kenny confessed to being a paedophile. Yeah, Sheila is now telling police that Kenny is a paedophile. She actually says that she has his confession on tape. She plays the tape for the police officers and is like, see, he's a paedophile. He has molested children and he is dangerous.
Kenneth Michael Countie, age 24, has told me that he himself is turned on by this 6-year-old boy.
Which was not true, and the police could tell from the recording that it was a false confession. So they actually start to search the farm. And on the grounds of the property, this is when they find a large burnt out mattress, along with loads of other burn piles. The officers started to search the burn piles and they find a knife with a melted blade, melted garden shears, and a burnt out chair. But most harrowing of all, in the middle of this burn pile, they find a human bone covered in flesh. And the officers are like, oh my God, is this Kenny? So they ask Sheila where this bone has come from. And Sheila just very calmly responds, it's either the bone of a rabbit or a paedophile. I sometimes question what is going on in this woman's head. She actually does say the bone is either from a rabbit or a paedophile. And the police say, what do you mean a paedophile? And then Sheila, it's almost like she starts to backtrack. She says, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean a paedophile? I said it was from a rabbit. And police were getting incredibly frustrated with Sheila because she just doesn't seem to ever tell the truth. So they arrest her and bring her down to the station. And you can actually see some of this footage online. And throughout this whole interview, Sheila does not admit to a single thing. Sheila said that she kicked Kenny out of her home after she had learned that he was a paedophile, and maybe Kenny was just so filled with guilt that he took his own life, and maybe he accidentally fell into the fire. And it's like, does she really think that anyone is going to believe this?
And how did it go when you met him?
Well, my first thought was, when I looked at him, was pedophile. But I thought, well, Sheila, I don't talk to myself. But I was thinking, I'm 47. He's legal age. He wants to chase me, so okay. We'll talk.
That's what you said. There is no way around it. You killed this kid.
I did
You
not
killed this
kill
kid,
him.
and you
No.
destroyed evidence by
No.
burning the
No.
bed.
No.
You destroyed evidence by burning his body in the pit.
No, I did not burn him.
Who did?
I don't know.
But because she didn't confess to a single thing, the police had to let her go. And they just had to carry on with their investigation and wait for the DNA results to come back from the bone. But what does Sheila do now that police have released her? Well, of course, she goes on the run. She starts befriending random men on the street, inviting them back to a motel room to have sex with them, and she gets them to pay for everything, until one evening, one of the random men that she has taken back to the motel room, he turns on the TV, sees the local news, sees a photo of Sheila that she is wanted for murder, and he's like, oh my God, I have just slept with a potential murderer. He phones the police, and they come out to the motel room and arrest Sheila. And from this point forward, Sheila was held in jail awaiting trial because obviously she's a flight risk. And a thorough investigation was carried out on her farm. And this is when it was confirmed that the bones and the human flesh that was found did belong to Kenny. And again, just like Michael, we don't know the details about how she killed Kenny. But that wasn't the only thing the police found. The police found bloodstains on the wall, as well as another human bone that Sheila had kept in a septic tank for years. They also found a birth certificate that belonged to Michael. And after running DNA tests on the bone they found in the septic tank, it was confirmed that that bone belonged to Michael. So it is now confirmed that Sheila has murdered 2 people. But that wasn't the only thing that the police found. They also came across many severed toes, which did not belong to Kenny or Michael. So it is likely that Sheila has murdered more. It is highly likely that Sheila is a serial killer. However, the human remains that were found, the severed toes, they were never traced back to any victim. But obviously they belong to somebody, if not multiple people. And this still remains a mystery to this very day. How many victims does Sheila actually have? And obviously you've got to remember Bill, her not husband, who apparently died of natural causes. I actually dread to think about how many victims Sheila could actually have. And eventually Sheila does go to trial for the murder of Kenny and Michael. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. However, she was found sane and fit to stand trial. And in the end, she was found guilty on both counts, both murders of Kenny and Michael. And in July of 2008, Sheila LaBarre was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. And she still remains there behind bars to this very day. And obviously she hasn't spoken about any more victims behind bars, so that still remains a mystery. And I just want to end this video remembering the known victims of today's case. Michael Deloge was described as a kind and caring man. He loved music, loved performing on stage, was incredibly close with his parents. He also leaves behind a child, and he was working so hard to turn his life around. He had so much ahead of him. He was only 36 years old. Kenneth Countie was described as a sweet and loving young man. He loved sports, always had a smile on his face. Autumn was his favourite season, and he had big dreams of joining the army. He had so much of his life left ahead of him, and he was taken far, far too soon. He was only 24 years old. And that is the end of today's crazy case. Half of today's case did not make sense. And I just hate to think how many victims there could be of Sheila's. There's obviously only been confirmed 2. But there could be so many more. So many men disappeared that were linked to her. And I just wonder, will we ever actually know all of the victims of Sheila's? Because I don't think we will. So as always, let me know your thoughts, theories and opinions on today's case. And don't forget to leave me your case suggestions in the comments down below, because I always want to know what you want to hear next. Thank you again to Audible for sponsoring today's video, and I'll see you all in my next one. Bye.